Hey, so in the last tutorial we covered how to create a simple objective and have the player complete it by walking into an area. In this tutorial we're going to cover something a little more advanced. When the player walks into the area condition and completes it, we're going to have a bunch of enemies spawn in a new room that I built over here, and we're going to have a new objective pop up where you have to kill all the enemies to complete the mission. So the first thing we're going to want to do is to pop open the actor classes browser, go to the info tab, expand that, and look for KF underscore story squad designer. And put that actor, we can go ahead and put it in the room where the enemies will spawn. This actor is basically a container for all the different types of enemy squads that we want to spawn in our map. You can have as many of these actors as you want, but you really only need to have one, and you can put as many squads as you want in here. So we'll create a squad, and we'll call it, let's say, let's have some crawlers, I guess. We'll call this crawler squad. Oops. That's a crazy capitalization going on there. Crawler squad. And in squad Zs, we'll click add, and we'll say Z type, crawler, let's say like 5 crawlers. And we'll create another squad, and let's say this is clot squad, and add some type clot, and let's say 5 clots. So I've just created 2 squads, and that in and of itself isn't going to do anything, but we can add a second actor. It's right underneath squad designer. It's called KF underscore story wave designer, and I'll put it right next to the squad designer. And this actor is what will actually spawn the squads we've created. So if we pop open the waves properties and click add to add a new wave, we're going to want to set an activation tag first of all. This tag can be used to turn the spawning on and also to turn it off. So in this case we'll say like toggle Z spawning, and we're going to want to set some volumes where the spawning is going to occur. I've actually gone ahead and already placed some volumes in this room. There's six zombie volumes. They have just the default settings. One thing you want to be aware of is that if you're creating a map that has a lot of open space, like this one where there's nothing to really block line of sight, you probably are going to want to go to the properties and turn on allow plain sight spawns. Because if you don't have that on, no zombies are going to spawn if the player is has a direct line of sight to the volume. So we're going to want that to be true, and we're also probably going to want to turn min distance to player. We're probably going to want that to be 0, just for the sake of testing. Otherwise, it's not going to spawn enemies if we're too close to the volume. Okay. So we'll go back to our. Oh, and also one thing to take note of is that the default tag for any zombie volume is just zombie volume. So we can actually use that tag there in the wave designer when we go to volume tags and we say zombie volume. So what's going to happen now is when we spawn this wave of enemies, it's going to pick from all 6 of these zombie volumes randomly, depending on certain factors like how far away is it from the player, stuff like that. But it'll pick from any one of these 6. Okay, so if we go back to the wave properties and we click on wave spawns, we're going to add a new spawn. A lot of these properties we're not going to mess with, but a couple that we might want to change, max Zs. Let's have I don't know, 30 enemies that spawn. And this value is actually going to get affected by things like difficulty and the player count. If I'm playing solo, which is going to be true in this case, then it'll just be 30 on normal difficulty. If this were on a harder difficulty or there were more players, that 30 would get changed to a higher number. but in this case it'll be accurate. We're also going to want to set a spawn interval, let's say 1 second. That's just the time it takes to in between squad spawns. And squad list is where we're going to add the squads we created in our story squad designer. So we'll add 2 entries to that, and we'll say clot squad, and we'll say crawler squad. And it's going to randomly pick one or the other to spawn. Okay, so the only thing we have left to do at this point is to hook up the toggle Z spawning activation event, and we're going to plug that into the. If we go back to our objective here, and we open up the objective events tab, we can create a new completion event. And completion events, as you'd expect, they're events that get triggered when an objective is completed successfully. There's also failure events, deactivation events. Deactivation events are triggered when an objective is completed or failed, or let's say you activate another objective without completing or failing it. Anytime the objective is no longer active is when that gets called. But we're only going to be worried about completion events for now. So we'll put toggle Z spawning in there. And so hopefully now when we complete the first objective, it should start spitting out enemies. And we're going to go ahead and create a second objective for actually killing these enemies. So if we go back to story objective base, KF story objective, and we'll just plop this down here. And this one, let's give it a name first. Let's call it kill all Zeds. Okay. And we'll go ahead and also add it to our objectives list here, right after get to the end. We don't want it before, otherwise it'll mess up the order. Okay, so that's good. And one other thing we're going to want to do here is, if you remember back to the first tutorial, we had the win game action that took place after this objective was completed. Since we have a second objective, we're actually going to want to take this out, clear it, and add obj action go to next objective, so that it'll just progress to the kill Zeds objective instead. And we can go ahead and actually put the win game action in the kill all Zeds objective. So clear that and add obj action win game. So now what's going to happen is when the first objective is completed, it's going to transition to the next objective, and when that next objective is completed, then it will win the game. So that's good. Alright. So I guess the next thing we want to do is we want to set some conditions for our kill Zeds objective. Right now, it's not really doing anything to track the number of enemies or anything like that. So if we go to the conditions rollout and we go to success conditions, we'll add a new one. We're going to want to use obj condition underscore wave counter for this. And wave counter conditions track the number of enemies belonging to a certain wave designer. And we just need to take note of the tag for this particular designer, which we haven't actually set right now. So we'll just go to the events tag, and we can call this something unique. A lot of times you might have multiple wave designers in really complex maps with a lot of different spawns. So we'll just call this wave 1 or something, and go back to our conditions, our success condition, and plug it in under the designer tag field. We put wave 1, which associates it with that designer. All the other settings, you can just leave those as default. Use current wave is important. That's if you have a designer that has many different waves, that just make sure you're always using whichever wave is the active one. Okay, so that is fine. We're going to want to set some HUD settings for this, just so everything looks all pretty and we can figure out what's going on a little easier. um, let's say um, let's say count down instead of count up. The screen count style determines basically it'll determine how the number of enemies remaining is displayed. So if it is count up, it'll be like 15 out of 30. If it's count down, it'll just say 15 enemies remaining. So that's the more traditional killing floor counter. So we'll say count down, and we'll show a checkbox, and we'll say kill the Zeds. And under our objective HUD settings, we'll set a header that says wave 1. Okay, so that should all be looking good. We'll save the map, and let's give it a try and see how it's working. Okay, so this is our first objective again, walking into the volume. And when I walked in the volume, it spawned the enemies. Now you'll notice that as I kill the enemies, it's not incrementing the counter. There's still 20 left, which is something that we actually forgot to do. So the reason it's not counting the number of enemies as we kill them is because we didn't set a event for the Zeds that are spawned. So we need to actually go back to our wave designer, go back to our wave spawns, and there's a series of events here you can set for the zombies that are spawned by this designer. We want to set the zombie death event, and we'll call this killed Zed. So this gets triggered anytime a Zed spawned by that designer is actually killed. And if we go back to our wave counter, we set the tag of the wave counter to be the zombie death event. And that's how the counter knows to increment its value every time a Zed is killed. Whoops. And we can also go ahead and probably set some path nodes up just really quick because they were having trouble pathing. So maybe that will be something smart. Okay, that should be fine. I'll just go ahead and rebuild paths, save the map, and try it again. It's also worth noting that the number of enemies left was 20 because we're playing on beginner mode right now. So even though we set 30, it was being adjusted by the game difficulty. Okay, so now we can see that the enemy counter is actually updating correctly. And when I kill all the enemies, I win the game. Awesome. So that I think that covers how to set up enemy spawns and how to have multiple objectives that link together. In the next tutorials, I'll probably go into more complex wave spawning systems, like if you wanted to have one really strong enemy spawning at a specific time, let's say, or to have different squads, different combinations of squads. But I think that should hopefully cover the basics. So thanks for watching.